Hello everyone, welcome to our Into the Deep season analysis by the 2023 to 2024 World Championships winning alliance, AI Citizens 19066, the Clueless 11212, and Texpand 18763. Our goal is to provide an in-depth analysis of the game and various approaches to the robot design to aid teams' design process. These are not necessarily the best options, just our three teams' initial thoughts on the game. We highly encourage all teams to brainstorm designs and come up with their unique strategy before watching this video. For some quick introductions, let's start with Peru.
Hello everyone, I am Peru. You may know me on Discord. I am from Team 19066 AI Citizens, and I am the captain and lead ad design. Ami?
Hello, I'm Rami from Team 19066 and I'm the driver of the team.
Hello, I'm Neil. I was the driver for Clueless last year, and this year I'm the mechanical captain and the mechanical design lead.
Hello, I'm Danielle. I'm from the Clueless 11212. I'm the co-captain for Outreach of the Clueless, and I'm also the human player for the team.
Hello everyone, my name is Elena. I'm on the Clueless 11212, and I am a mechanical build lead and outreach lead.
Hi everyone, I'm Josh. I'm from 18763 Texpand, and I'm the lead programmer and a senior mechanical member.
Yeah, I am Ethan, also from Texpand 18763, and I actually co-captain with Josh, and I'm also senior programmer.
Cool. Let's start with Rami talking about a breakdown of the game priorities to help us create a specific robot goals that will help streamline the design process.
Hey, so I think the most important thing in this season will be the fast cycling to get more yellow samples than the opposing alliance. That could create a huge advantage, especially in the high ticket games when you could be out of samples even before the endgame even starts.
Yeah, and I think also
That's true.
Yeah, maybe like also
You can go.
Yeah, adjusting paths between your robots might be also quite important. There is a lot of open space, but if you're trying to come in at the same angle at the basket, or trying to place, I don't know, like clips at the same time, place the specimens at the same time, that might end up being quite a bit of a challenge. So you definitely need to work on strategy with who's placing when and what angles.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think we're gonna run out of specimens quite quickly. I mean, the yellow ones might even go out in the first minute of gameplay in high-level games, so it's a thing to pay attention to.
Yeah, traveling from the pickup zone to the baskets is also going to be somewhat of a time consumer, so it's pretty important that you design your intake and deposit system to efficiently transfer the sample from one side or the other, or you just might have a pass-through mechanism. And another thing, placement of these specimens onto the chambers is actually pretty important, because if you place them horizontally, then that's going to waste a lot of space, especially since there's not an unlimited amount of space on the bars. So placing them vertically definitely gives you an advantage because you're able to place more.
Yeah, I think it's interesting also considering when placing them, you might have to actually rearrange or push them all to one side to give you enough space to put on more. So that's something you might also want to consider.
Yeah, I think during our testing, sort of the max number we were able to put on without like pushing them to the side, just with our hands. I mean, it was easy to fit 15 on, and it was much harder to fit more. After we got to that point, we sort of had to push them to the side to clip them on easily.
Yeah, and just a small side thing, I don't think it's necessarily relevant right now, but the game manual has not specified whether or not you're able to bring a specimen out and then bring it back with your robot to the observation zone to rearrange the orientation. I definitely think there's going to be questions about that, since the human player is going to be doing a lot this year. So yeah, so another priority that the robot might also have this year is maybe a weight limit because of the overly complicated hang. It might require a good amount of power, so the robot might need to be lighter, even if there is no weight limit this year.
Yeah, I totally agree. By having like a heavy robot, you're definitely going to be a lot harder for hang, especially this season. I would consider this season to be the hardest hang in the history of FTC because I mean, even just getting the first hang on the first bar is not an easy challenge, and getting the second one is ridiculously difficult. And also adding on, there's also size. So for this season, the size is also a concern. So the maximum mechanical limit of the robot when it's fully extended has to be under 20 by 42 inches. So let's say you have something extends out of the front of the robot and also the back of the robot, then together extended have to be under 42 inches. So you have to really consider your entire robot design before you start designing and building it. So especially for the intake and deposit, you make sure it doesn't go over the limit.
Yeah, and I also think it's going to be a bit of a challenge for the teams if they want to have a extendo intake because there is going to be a barrier for the center part where you intake samples. So that plus the entire other robot, all under 42 inches, is going to be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, definitely is a limit. But I mean, I can definitely understand why they have put that limit in. Like we saw Robo King's Aurum this last season in center stage have massive extension both out there, the front of their robot, and out the back of their robot. And having something like that, for example, on a turntable, some robot could just stay in the same place and cycle things, which would make the game, firstly, like much less entertaining to watch, maybe more fun to build, but you know, they have their reasons for things.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to auto strategy. Josh, do you want to start us off?
So to talk a bit more about auto strategy and kind of starting with the overall picture there, the big thing about auto this year is there is no randomization, which has been a big part in FTC auto for many seasons. I can't remember one without it, to be honest. So yeah, this season without randomization, the biggest thing is actually almost the only thing you're going to be doing is cycling samples from the middle submersible to your top basket. You could go to the bottom basket, but your points per second is not going to be as good. Having said that, though, just because there's no randomization doesn't mean that it's not going to be a high-scoring auto, because the autos scores get doubled in Teleop, like in Center Stage as well, except that for this game, it's actually 8 points and then it gets recounted. So it's actually 16 points per sample you put in, which is quite a lot, actually.
Yeah, and just something to add with auto, going like trying to get as many cycles as possible. Like Rami was talking about as well, trying to get those yellow samples is gonna be probably the best aim, best thing to go for, because at the end of Teleop, or well at the beginning of Teleop, or whenever, they're gonna have less. The opposing alliance is gonna have less not pixels. They're gonna have less yellow specimens to place themselves, and that's gonna end up with quite a big advantage.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think I mentioned a little bit with the with the driver control about having different paths, so you make sure robots aren't sort of hitting into each other or having to wait. I think that's going to be quite a big thing for auto, because that basket, like the backboard or in the backdrop in center stage was quite big. And even there, it was a bit of a challenge to have two robots placing at the same time and coordinating it. But here we have to have two robots sort of placing in one basket. And that thing is a lot smaller. Sure, there's more space on each side. So I think that opens up the door for potentially you have one robot coming in along the wall on the one side at 90 degrees to the basket, and the other one coming in on the other side. They're both robots up against the wall. You could actually potentially place at the same time. It does depend on the nature of your deposit, but I think that could be a really good aim to, especially for later competitions where you're going to be cycling quite fast, to be able to have much easier coordination with other top teams. Yeah, and then one thing to say is doing clips in auto, like in driver controlled, it's only going to give you two more points to do one with the clip, turn your sample into a specimen, and having those extra that extra trip and that extra time is going to put a big damper or like be much slower in terms of points per second. But potentially, if coordinating autos and that is going to be tough, or yeah, depending on how auto is looking, it might be beneficial to try and do some of those samples, turn them into specimens inside of auto. It might be challenging to get that sort of robot moving and picking up and depositing going, but the human player is active in autonomous, which is a big change from from previous seasons. And I think that interaction could be really cool and might be the difference between some of the like a good scoring auto and like a winning scoring auto. Just getting those 4 extra points per cycle.
One interesting thing to add there would be that actually possibly having an auto strategy that when starting closer to the basket, you start with a preloaded yellow, and you actually just cycle directly from the 3 spike marks that you have available there with the yellow pixels, with the yellow, sorry, the yellow samples, and the rest of the yellow ones in the submersible. And then if you're starting further away from the basket, you actually rather preload with the clip and actually clip that one on before possibly cycling alongside your alliance partner. Just is a more efficient way of starting your auto because you start closer to the chambers.
Yeah, and then you're also not. I see you. Then you're also not going to have like challenging interactions where you're both trying to pick up those yellow samples on the lines.
All right, Elena, do you want to start talking about Teleop strategy?
Yeah, sure. So, as Josh already mentioned, yellow samples are definitely going to be the most optimal choice for both Teleop and Auto in the beginning, because then the opposing alliance can't take your color samples and you're taking the color neutral samples, which means you can get more overall. So, I think just claiming possession of those in the beginning is going to be the top priority. And then also filling the top basket with yellow samples and then clipping all of your alliance specific samples onto the high chamber. Those are definitely going to be the most high scoring methods, especially since the lower basket is, I think, only 4 points. So yeah. So if you complete both the top basket and the clips for specimens, then you and your alliance partner can just immediately optimize how many points you have.
Yeah, totally agree. And just to add on, the top bucket fits around 20 samples if you stack it really well. And but if you if you just randomly drop it in and we're stack it poorly, it will only fit around 15. So it's important that you carefully deposit the top, because then you'll be able to fit more inside and get more points. And also, because it only fits 20 samples, when you stack it well, I think at a high level game, it's very, very likely that you'll run out of space in the high bucket and you'll have to cycle on the high chamber instead.
Yeah, that's a pretty good point. I think it's important for teams to note how exactly their deposit is going to work. I think when you drop the samples into the bucket, there is some amount of variability in how it drops, especially because of the irregular shape of the basket. So it's not going to be like center stage where everything just fits neatly together.
Yeah. And I mean, I saw like just with directing things in, like we saw in center stage, people having like a cloth or a piece of plastic just to stop when it's dropped down, it doesn't bounce to the side or something. So having like curtains or things like we saw in center stage might be applicable.
Another important part of Teleop is obviously going to be coordinating with your fellow alliance partner. I think most teams will have definitely teams that are stronger than them and weaker than them on the same alliance. So it's just important to coordinate with weaker alliances to make sure you can still get enough yellows to not give the opposing alliance a big enough advantage while you're still getting as many specimens as possible onto the bar.
Yeah, so one possible strategy could be like having one team do the yellows and other team to focus on the red or blue, so that both robot can be working at their max efficiency at all times.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because you definitely want to complete both in terms of having 20 specimens and the top basket at least full of yellow. But it's mainly a case of order because you'd want to do the yellows first to make sure that your opposing alliance can't get more yellows than you can, and ideally you would get more yellows than them and still allow enough time to complete all the specimens towards the second half of Teleop and into endgame as well, maybe.
Yeah, it's gonna be you're gonna really need to know how fast your robot can go and how much you're gonna be able to do with your partner. So I think definitely collecting metrics about your robot before you go into a big competition. I think that's gonna be quite valuable when it comes to discussing strategy in terms of like what you're gonna do. Like we saw in power play, like you could finish the 18 cones like really fast. And it was actually in the end, if you had two really good teams, it was more about getting the ownership, like what's the best way to use your cones to get the points, a point edge over the other team. And I think that's going to be a lot of what this game is about, especially with those alliance neutral samples.
Yeah, and basically, I think in matches when you have like four really good teams that could easily finish off all the samples, you can even get one of your alliance partners to just cycle the yellows on the low basket, just so you know that your opponent can't get them.
Because actually, if you think about it, if you score a yellow, and like you get 20, each of those yellows is only worth 8 points. But if you score a 21st, like the 21st yellow, that extra one yellow into your low basket, you only get 4 points. But they lose out 8 points for that yellow. So you're actually going to get 12 points difference per yellow you take that they can't put in their top basket, which is more than any of those yellows that you're able to place in your top basket.
So it's really about sort of cost benefit analysis. Yeah. So another thing also that I was thinking about, while we're on the topic of coordinating with your alliance, I was thinking about how the scoring mechanics for specimens and samples is going to be a little bit different because samples you just drop into the basket, but specimens you do kind of need a good amount of force to actually clip them onto the bars. So I think there might be some sort of specialization between robots, between ones that can do specifically specimens and other ones that can do specifically samples. But I also think the highest scoring robots are going to figure out a way to do both efficiently with the same mechanism.
Yeah, I definitely agree. At one thing.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, because like how we saw how center stage was when the winning formula proved to be a small and fast robot and an extender robot. Now in into the deep, it might be a robot that can easily place on the bars to place the specimens on the bars, and one to just cycle the baskets really fast.
Yeah, and just to add on to Lena's point about specialization, potentially, like for example, like if you're picking your partners, maybe you want to pick a partner that is like that can compensate for your weakness. For example, like if you're really good at specimens, you might want to pick a partner that can cycle the samples really quick, and vice versa. So this game is also strategic, not only just the game itself, but also picking your alliance partner.
For sure, yeah.
And that means you might not necessarily do the best in the qualification rounds because you can only do one thing really well. It doesn't mean you're not going to be able to do samples if you've specialized in specimens, but it means that when you get paired with another robot who's specialized in the samples, your team is going to be almost unbeatable then.
Yeah, so I definitely think the best strategy would be to try and specialize in both, but that will require a lot of thought and careful consideration about what deposit mechanisms you're going to be using.
All right, Neil, you want to start us off with endgame strategy?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the endgame, this year endgame rule is very simple, but it's also because the rule is just you have to climb up the bars. But I also believe that this year's hang is probably the hardest hang in the history of FTC. because I mean, there's three levels. One is just one is just parking, and one is hanging off the lower bar, and one is hanging off the top bar, while still being above the lower bar. So I mean, even just hanging off the lower bar is not an easy task if you think about it, because you can't. It's unlike center stage where you can directly go under the bar and just hang off of it. This time is you have to like kind of hang off the side because you can't. It's really hard to cross the bar. So that's going to be a big challenge. And also, one thing that teams can consider is, well, it's only 15 points for the low hang and 30 points for the high hang, which is, well, even if you count the high hang, it's a little bit less than 4 cycles in the high bucket. So, like potentially, if teams don't have time, hang might be not good like a good thing to spend their time on if you can just focus on cycling the high bucket.
Yeah, I definitely think like what Neil said there. If it takes you maybe 15 seconds to hang, and you can place 4 specimens even in the low bucket. If it takes you 15 seconds to do the top hang and maybe 5 to do the lower one, and you can do 3 cycles into the low bucket, you've almost made up your points already just by doing those 3 cycles there. And then you also don't have to develop a whole nother system. So you could spend that extra time specializing your cycle times, reducing that, increasing your transfer efficiency, and all of that. And it could save you a lot of time just not trying to get those last 15 points for the second hang.
Yeah, and I think that's gonna be a really good solution for like the start of the season with the league meets and all of that. But getting to more of the end of the season with the World Championship, I think almost all teams with already developed a system that can hang on the high bar really fast.
Yeah, and the problem is that even if the third level of the hang is quite hard to do, it's a complex system, it adds weight to robot and whatever, you have to take into account that we're gonna cycle like all of the samples really quickly, so you might just get into the end game with nothing left on the field, and just the hang might make the difference. So in high level play, it will be important probably. Although, as Rami said, in early level play, league meets, regionals, maybe even states, it might not be that required.
I mean, it is a lot of points if you think about the fact that if both the robots and your alliance hang, it's like 60 points, which is super high actually. So it's definitely going to be super important, I think, like you're saying, for competitions further closer to the end of the season.
Yeah.
I think what I'm going to be most excited to see in terms of hang is how teams are going to power their hang, because there's already a lot of discussion about extendos, which usually require DC motors. And for hang, it is pretty complicated because it kind of seems like you might need 2 hang mechanisms just to get up to the first bar and then being fully supported by it, and then reaching all the way up to the second bar and being fully supported by that.
Yeah, adding on to
Let's talk
Elena,
about
in terms of powering, potentially you can also power it with servos. For example, last year, in the beginning of the season, no one really thought that you can lift an entire robot with servos. But for example, we realized that servos are actually more than just viable. They're actually a really good idea, and they save a lot of weight, and they're actually even just one axon servo with an appropriate spool limit, spool size, it can lift the entire robot. So it's something to consider.
Yeah, but one thing is for certain, and that's that the hang is gonna be the trickiest thing in this entire season.
I guess we can talk about subsystems now.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to intake. Okay, there's a lot to do in this season, and of course, the main objective is collecting the samples. And if you take a quick look at the samples, they do look like smaller stones from Skystone, and we've seen a lot of intakes for that. There's also some intakes that worked on the yellow cubes that we had in Fight Frenzy, and so it is possible to make either a claw or an active intake system. The main problem with an active intake system is that if you wanna intake the specimens, it's gonna be way harder because of the hook, and so you will either just not be able to intake them, or you're gonna spend a lot of time and resources just making a really complex intake that can do it. But the claw, it requires a lot more precision, but it can do like everything. And at the same time, you can make a robot that has just a single claw. There is no need for transfer. So, like a 2910 design, a yellow arm, cookie bots, just tiny modifications. And that would be it for collection. And there's also delivery ideas. And if we exclude the fact that there are transferless designs, like the cookie design we saw in center stage, if we do think about transfers, it's gonna be harder, either from a claw to a claw or a claw active intake to a claw, because it's not that easy to outtake with a bucket, considering the amount of force you need to put on the specimen to hook it on the bars. And so this way you require precision and force. So I guess in the end the claw might be a good idea for this one.
Yeah, I think also like the claw is going to be good for hanging those the specimens onto the high chamber. But I also think that a claw, like like Neil was talking about, if you fit those if you fit the samples really neatly into the top basket, you can fit 20. If you just throw them in randomly, like with a bucket, you can only fit about 15. So I think a claw as well,
Yeah.
on something where you can actually like place it well inside the bucket could also get you an advantage. You can score how many more? It's like, yeah, 16 more points
5 more, that's
with the precision placement up in the basket.
I also think it's pretty interesting what you mentioned about the specimens, because human players will be placing the specimens um, into the observation zone. So I think it's important to consider strategizing beforehand with your human player how you want them to place it, if there's a specific orientation that your robot can intake or cannot intake.
and teams need to remember the fact that the specimen itself doesn't just lay flat. The hook itself has a tiny edge that makes it slanted on the tiles. And because of this, again, it might be harder to align the intake. It might even fall on the side. Uh, but then again, you can actually place the specimens on the wall too with the hook.
Yeah, that might be a really good option for much easier intaking, because it's going to be, because then you have one less axis that you need to align your um, claw with or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and that sums about 90% of the game. But then there's also the climbing part, which Neil actually spoke about it. There's multiple ways you can do it. We've seen in center stage, there were teams that were running a completely separate mechanism that used an entire motor to climb. For example, a linear actuator, or just separate, another set of slides. We've seen servo climbing with arms, like for example, even Clueless. And we've seen, and in my opinion, the simplest, but again, it's not that easy way of just mounting some hooks on your slides. But in this case, this season it's not as easy, just because you have the metal bar at the bottom and you're gonna have to make quite a long hook just to get on the bar. There's a lot of ways you can make a climbing system, but then you have to consider the fact that that's just level 2. You have another separate level you need to climb to. I mean, it's not a need and necessary thing, but it gets you a lot of points, and so we will probably see later in the season, probably like November, December, some designs popping up, some simpler designs that are efficient for climbing on both levels.
And I think maybe we can. I don't know if FR. I think FRC has done some things with I don't know, with monkey bars. Definitely not like vertical. But I don't know if looking at them for inspiration might be of use. But I think one thing that I've seen even in center stage is the swinging once you get up on that first bar. Either stopping that somehow or using it to your advantage when climbing. Could be the difference between actually getting that hang reliably and even falling off that first bar.
That was 2022 FRC season Rapid React with the robots, but that was, as you said, monkey bars, not vertical ones.
Yeah, and I think a lot of them had two linear slide systems to actually.
Yep. Most robots had two different set of slides, and they were playing a lot with their center of gravities too, because it was more predictable.
All right, let's go into automation ideas. Josh?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that you would normally think about when looking into a game like this would be there's actually a lot of areas for using vision to assist with field localization and just generally adding automation. So like for example, you don't have long distances when driving to having like constant speed when tracking your position on the field. You'll have often when you're optimizing it, you'll have a lot of short jerky movements or more jerky movements because you're driving a lot shorter distances. And that can sometimes mess up your localization quite easily. So using they've got quite a few April tags on the field perimeter this year, and so using that to your advantage to add to your like odometry systems or distance sensors or whatever, I think is a big part of auto and just teleop enhancements in general. And then yeah, obviously you can also use it to detect the bricks, but that's something that'll happen a bit later in the season probably, and it's quite a lot harder to implement effectively. It's very tough.
And I think continuing on, another good automation that's quite simple to implement and will actually improve cycling time is something we've seen in Power Play 2. It was just because you already had like 3 preset heights at which you would outtake your cones in Power Play and in this season specimens. You would just have like 3 different buttons, or in this case, you could have 4 buttons to raise your lift instantly to the exact height needed, and for example, another button to just do the entire movement of hooking, opening the claw, and going back to a neutral state. So automating the raising of the lift and the outtaking it's decently easy, and it can prove very useful. There's a lot less coordination needed when it comes to the transfer. There's a lot less needed time wasted when you control the lift manually. It's all just very quickly.
Yeah, it's very high return with the amount of effort you're going to be putting in.
Yeah, for sure.
Also, something maybe harder to do is looking at this season. There's a lot less trajectories that cross each other. There probably won't be much defense. Robots won't run one into another. And in this case, teams might even consider automating the trajectories themselves, going to the specimens, placing them completely automatic, taking some samples already, dropping it off to the human player, maybe even the bucket itself. There's a lot you can automate. Specifically automating in the Teleop period trajectories it's quite hard, but it is doable, and it's a lot more viable than in center stage, for example, where there was just too much defense, too much crossing between trajectories.
Yeah, I think I think that would be really cool to do that, and for teams to look into doing that. I think that one thing to consider when doing that is you definitely need to make sure you have some way of the drivers easily overriding it, stopping it, or just, yeah, if it goes haywire, or now there's a robot that's driving into the path that you know it's going to take or whatever, then you need some way the drivers can easily kind of take over or stop it or something like that.
Yeah, and it fits well into the discussing of the paths that you're going to take to deposit things off with your alliance partner. So you make sure that when you sync up or when you're placing at the same time or collecting at the same time, that you're not going to have collisions.
All right, let's move on to our last section of unique insights. Sami?
So I think the most interesting ideas that you can have for placing on the bars are clipping the specimens vertically, so that you save up way more space when trying to place them.
I think another thing we've also seen is, I don't know, using like an arm to place them. I mean, the force is not going to be that much, But if you're using slides or something, or your main motors for your arm, sort of pulling it down with the arm or the slides or something to deposit it, or even like pulling it up on, seems to work quite well in terms of the amount of force you can apply with those kinds of motors. Might be better than doing it just with servos.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another thing, this is just sort of a random thought. With the amount of turning, the amount of cycling and the distance that's is needed to travel, you want to save as much time as possible. So maybe later on in the season, you might see, I'm just thinking, you have the placement or depositing slides potentially at a slight angle, so not like parallel with the side of your robot, like twisted to the side, and that might save a few, like, I don't know, like a few hundred milliseconds each time you're cycling, just in terms of turning, and that could increase maybe the amount that you're able to cycle by one specimen, which could be 8 points or 4 points, and that could actually be quite a deciding factor in a high-scoring game.
Yeah. It could actually also help with the aspect of losing position on the field if you are automating your trajectories, like Peru talked about. Turning less when driving will help you keep your position more accurately a lot more.
Yeah.
So it might even have a more benefit than just one cycle in terms of speed, because your automation is still working more precisely than if you didn't have that.
Yeah, and especially with new teams who are starting out, getting new control hubs that seem to have a slightly worse quality IMU than some of the older versions, this might be quite a good consideration.
Although, having said that, they are releasing a new IMU, which could be useful, which could be very nice.
Okay, yeah, that could change things.
Yeah, I also think in automation, there's definitely an advantage to having presets of positions for your deposit mechanism, because you will be scoring at a range of different positions. You might have a different method of scoring the specimens than you have just dropping these samples into the basket. So I think instead of manually moving your deposit mechanism to whatever height you need, just having a preset on your controller for each one would be really quick.
Thank you everyone for watching this video. We hope this helps gives you some ideas for the season. Please feel free to put any questions in the comment section or reach out to our teams via Instagram. We are so excited to see what you all come up with this season. Bye!
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.